So what's
Crazy.
going on, everybody? We've got, let's see, we've got 40 so folks on Zoom. We've got another 30, 40 folks on LinkedIn. Really excited, Andy, for this conversation today. For those of you who do not know, I'll let him introduce himself. This came about, I did a post maybe a month and a half or so ago about MEDDIC and MEDDIC and my thoughts on it, which were not positive, which is more of, this is a process. And again, these are just facts that was developed back in the 90s, literally the 90s, of like the original version. And Andy has now kind of adapted it and made it modern. And, it was a very lively conversation around MEDDIC, MEDDIC. Is it relevant? How relevant is it? And what I really liked about Andy, who, we'll talk about, kind of what he does, which is, MEDDIC all day, is we were both kind of saying the same thing, he and I, which was that as a deal framework, fantastic, plays, works. There's some nuances, and I want to get into those too, where I'm like, like the champion and some of those things. But a lot of it's the application. And so we kind of had this really quality back and forth, and I DM'd Andy on LinkedIn and said, hey, do you want to do a talk about it? Like, let's talk about MEDDIC. Let's talk about the future of it, how applicable, because again, I know so many sales leaders, it's like, they go from company to company, they bring MEDDIC or they bring MEDDIC or, a variation of it. And so, I thought it was time to have a really kind of modern 2022 conversation on MEDDIC and what it means today and the applications of it and how people apply it. And so I'll be monitoring the Q&A, and same thing on LinkedIn chat. So if you all have questions, I really encourage anybody who, sells in a MEDDIC environment or, is like, man, I've questioned this too, or I've got a question too. Please, I always say, be selfish. Ask the question, join us, in the conversation. So Andy, I'm really excited for the conversation today. And yeah, it'd be great. Why don't you tell everyone just a little bit about kind of your day-to-day and, MEDDIC and what it means to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jake. Hey, everyone. Good to be here. So yeah, I'm Andy Whyte. I am a lifelong sales guy. So I started in B2C sales. My first job was literally knocking on doors, trying to sell people on their doorstep. Moved into B2B sales, was what was originally an SDR role. Back then we called it telesales, didn't even have a posh title. and then kind of just it. And I always think of myself as super lucky that my first B2B sales job was in SaaS and tech. And I kind of just, climbed the ladder of, going bigger job titles, smaller companies, smaller job titles, bigger company, kind of, and kind of moved my way into leadership. I've kind of worked most kind of SaaS companies. I've worked for like bootstrap startups, unicorns, Oracle, like across the lot. And I learned MEDDIC, and it's funny because my company's called MEDDIC, but I actually have always practiced MEDDIC. So, and there's nothing secret there. It's like the domain name that was available. So that's where we went with that. I didn't start planning to have a business. I was just starting to like blog, and that blog turned into a book that turned into like a business. So, but yeah, I learned MEDDIC, as it were, at Sprinkler, and for me it just changed. Like the thing that for me, the way I describe it to people that don't quite understand what it is like before I had MEDDIC, I was trying really hard. I read all the sales books. I was like working hard, but I had this like deal uncertainty. Like I didn't know what I didn't know. And what MEDDIC did for me was it gave me confidence. It didn't necessarily help me win, but it helped me know if I was going to win, where I was winning, where I was losing. And so it kind of was a framework for me that underpinned like my style, underpinned my tactics, all that sort of stuff. And it just became part of my playbook as an individual contributor. And then when I went into leadership, it wasn't something I like prioritized, but every company I went to, it was without a shadow of doubt the first and most important thing I needed to implement. And the results we saw off the back of that, I think, like confirmed that it was, pretty powerful framework to implement.
All right, so let's dive into it for everyone. So first, why don't you define it? Like, let's define for those of you who might be tuning in who may not know. Why don't and Andy, I'll let you do it. Let's define MEDDIC and MEDDIC and kind of the nuances of it. And I think then what I want to do is we'll kind of talk about different components of it, and I'll give kind of my take on where, you know, some of the questions I have around it and my take on some of the letters and the names in there. So why don't you define for everyone MEDDIC and MEDDIC and the definitions as you see them?
Yeah, sure. So the way I'll approach this is to kind of break it down a little bit, because I think if I was to say what I think it is, you might have a different definition for what you think that thing is. So if I was to say to you, I think it's a qualification framework, I think, I'm assuming, but I think, and we should get into this, that you and I will have a very different definition of what qualification is.
Totally.
Yeah, and so exactly. We should maybe get into that, right? But for me, it's a qualification framework. And the way I think about it is in any solution sale. So I'm talking about not commodity sales. I'm talking about where there is a solution. There is, in my mind, 3 pillars. The first is value. The second are the stakeholders, and the third is the process. And different salespeople are better at different parts of those pillars. And that's a really interesting thing I see. But in any deal, you have to find the value, and then you have to attach the value to those stakeholders, and then you have to understand the customer's process to get the deal done. And what MEDDIC does is it sits above those pillars and gives the salesperson, sales team, revenue team a framework in which they can stay attached to those critical pillars of selling. And so it would be, you know, if we zoom into the value, it's like, okay, so what is it? What are we doing here? Like, why are we engaged in this early conversation? Let's say the first sort of conversation. It's the customer has to have a pain. They have to have a goal or a challenge or something that's occurring, right? So that's the first part, is the pain. And obviously, it's not just as binary as like, do they have a pain or not? The most elite salespeople will grab hold of that pain and will quantify it and will really make the customer feel the urgency around that pain. The way they do that is by quantifying the pain with metrics. So that's where the metrics come in, right? So you were talking about pain, quantifying with metrics. The value thing comes straight over to the decision criteria, which is the part where we're kind of saying, this is what the customer's going to be basing their decision upon. These are the criteria in which the things they think they need in this solution. And that's not just technical, that can be like commercial and relationship based, all those kind of parts. And that's really important that we bring that into the value perspective, because otherwise I'd be an elite salesperson. I go in, I find pain, I make the customer feel like, oh my God, if I don't fix this, I got a problem. And then I quantify that pain. They think, yeah, the business case adds up. And then my competitor goes and goes, oh, good, Andy's made you a business case. Cool, yeah, we can do that as well. Ours is 10% cheaper or whatever. So the decision criteria for me is how I defend and differentiate my solution. So that's like the value part. Stakeholders are really straightforward. Champion, imperative. We're going to talk about this, I'm sure, but like no champion, no deal. Economic buyer, critically important, particularly in solution selling. And competition as well, which is, by the way, not just your rival. It could be someone building internally. It could be doing nothing. It could be like, you know, if you think about SaaS today or any technology today, you have your core, what you do, but and you might have 5 rivals that do pretty much what you do a bit differently, but then there's 50 around the peripheral that do a little bit of what you do. So yeah, competition's huge.
Yeah, so, and that's what I love about the second C. I mean, I agree, especially today, where it's so easy to discover the competition, right? It used to be, you know, again, we're just talking 5, 7, 10 years ago, where the competition in particular, you know, people would do a little bit of research, they'd ask a few people, et cetera, but you just couldn't find that much. Today, I mean, if you just don't assume that every deal is competitive, you know, you're going to lose.
Yeah. And you remember when you used to look in the visitor book when you arrive at an office and you try and like check back the pages to see if you saw any of the reps that you used to compete against. And I used to have an alter ego. I used to have Andre Blanc, which was like, and it was, yeah, I'm sure if anyone's now thinking that guy was always in my deals, that was me. Sorry.
Oh, I love that. So Andre Blanc is how you would like portray yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, Andre Blanc. Yeah,
I love it. I mean, it's a smooth name.
I would make my handwriting like extension. I did very Andre Blanc.
Andre Blanc does not have Andy Whyte's handwriting, right? Andre Blanc has like I can picture it now. Yeah. It's almost like calligraphy or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, so let's jump into it. So I want to go back to let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about value and kind of pain point. My issue with MEDDIC and BANT, and because need, right? BANT, need, pain. You can, you know, Sandler's got the pain funnel. It's variations of the same thing, which is like, hey, if there's no issue or no deal, like there's no issue, there's no deal, right? Here's the issue I have is there are many times, and I'm talking solution big deals, where I've had a first meeting and they didn't know they had the need. They didn't know. They're just like, where you have the discovery, you're like, well, how are you guys thinking about this trend? How are you thinking about this? And they go, well, we don't, but wow, we should maybe learn. Like, we want to learn more and close big 6-7 figure deals with this mindset. And so one of the big rubs I have, Andy, is like too many reps are lazy and they instead say, well, they didn't have a need. There's no need. There's no pain on the first call. So how do you get around that? Right. Which is like the idea of like, look, the job is not information giving. The job is called sales. And let's be very real about what that means. I mean, sometimes your job is to create the need. And so how do you feel MEDDIC does or doesn't address those types of buyers?
Yeah. This is what I thought. So this is where you and I have a different definition of qualification. And your definition of qualification, by the way, is the definition of what most of our industry thinks qualification is. So it's not like you're wrong and I'm right. It's just like different perspectives, right? But what you're talking about there for me is not professional qualification. So what I think about when I think about qualification, it comes down to this question. What you're talking about with qualification there is me as the salesperson qualifying, is there a deal here for me? Does this customer need what I've got, right? And the way I think about qualification is, if you're my customer right now, I think about it like this. First and foremost, if I'm an elite salesperson, I work for an elite company. I have no end of opportunity. I just need to put the effort in to find those opportunities. So that is my mindset, right? Going into this opportunity. So I'm coming from a more professional perspective. I don't seem desperate to the customer for the first instance, right? And I enter into that conversation from a perspective of, hey, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, is there enough of a challenge, or do you have goals big enough that I can help you towards that's going to be worth both of our while in engaging in what is in our industry typically a 3-month, if not longer, evaluation process? So do you have, and I'm just curious, I just want to know exactly kind of how you described it. I want to get into, what are your goals? What are your challenges? What is it you're trying to do? And then I'm figuring out what I'm qualifying is there enough of a problem that I can help you with that's going to be worth both of our while, not at this point you buying, but is it going to be worth our while in entering into an engagement where we're going to evaluate? And I'm going to need you, for me to do my best job, I'm going to need your help on this as well. I'm going to need your help to build a business case. I'm going to need your help.
But I mean, Andy, that's a lot. I mean, like, what call number are we on at this point, right? Like you're like, how I cannot, especially again, we're talking about bigger deals, right? And not, I mean, this is also applicable, but Andy, there's no chance on the first call. It's like all those things. I love you. I'm going to be your champion.
Okay.
I've got the timeline. I've got like, how do you think about this? Because I think this is where, and again, the reason I'm kind of interrupting and I want to get into it is because I think this is where reps and leaders are very confused on this process.
Think they are.
And so what call are we on when you're talking about some of this stuff where it's like,
Okay, so hand on heart, in the warm-up, we were talking about our families. So hand on heart, on my children's life, this morning, I had a call with a company who are in the top 5 biggest companies in tech. It's not Oracle, it's not SAP, but it's one of the other ones. The first time I'd met this person, I told them I was coming on this call, so they can call me out on this, right? And I didn't, but they did want to start mapping out the stakeholders. They decided they want to implement MEDDIC, and this is nothing to do with MEDDIC. I could be selling, marketing tech or whatever it was. This person spent the final 30-40% of the call with me, talking me through who the stakeholders were in their leadership team, who we needed to get on board. She had sent I won't say the internal messaging tool because it would give away who the client was. But she sent a message on the call to somebody to capture them, to have a conversation with them, one of their senior people. That person in that example was, for me, a potential champion. Another example I could give is one of the really great sales guy. I used to work with a guy called Lee Gregory. In our first meeting with a retailer, he managed to plan out the close plan with the CMO. He built enough urgency in that first meeting. We're talking
Andy. It can happen in the first meeting, especially if people come inbound and they've already done it before. Totally agree. But my issue here, let's talk about this for real. Cold lead, you reach out outbound. They don't know shit about shit, right? They don't know this, right? like, what I want to make sure people take away from this is like, it might take 2 or 3 calls to figure it out in an enterprise deal.
Sure.
And I feel like too many people want it all that. I mean, you can disagree. If you're like, no, Jake, it has to happen on the first call, like, cool, like, let's talk about it. But I think it is completely unrealistic to think that
what happened. What are we talking about happening on the first call?
That they're going to lay out a timeline for you. They're going to identify the stakeholders.
No, of course not. Of course not. But you said that was
identify
impossible.
the needs. But don't you think a lot of reps think that, Andy? A lot of reps think like that are trained like on the first call, I'm supposed to, and if they don't, and if the customer hasn't figured it all out, instead we're like DQ, no. Not qualified.
No, well that's nothing to do with MEDDIC. That's to do with bad leadership, you know.
But they're using the MEDDIC framework. And my point is this:
okay,
can MEDDIC happen? I guess this. Let me ask. This is a better question. Over the course of 2 or 3 calls versus the first call.
Yeah. Well, so MEDDIC isn't a process; it's a framework, right? So you can't. If you're thinking about it from like, well, from here we need to get these letters done. From here we need to get those letters done. That would suggest that selling is like this linear process that happens the same every time around. We know that's not the case, right? And I know you're not saying that.
Yeah.
So, but what I was going to go on to say before we went off a little bit was that in that first instance, how I use MEDDIC, right? How I'm going into that first conversation is the first thing is, before I've even gone anywhere near that first meeting, I've used MEDDIC as a framework to help me be on the front foot for the conversation, right? You mentioned it a lot. Customers are busy. They also don't really like meeting salespeople. That's because the standard's low and they're not used to getting good value from it. So when I go into a first meeting, I go in with a preset in my mind decision criteria based on my expertise about my industry, about what I'm selling and the customer I'm selling to. So these are the things I think this customer's going to need. These are the things I think are going to change the goals and challenges this customer has, how they can tackle those. I also go in with what we would call metrics ones, M1s, and these are proof points from my existing customer base that I take in, and I start my conversation early on by talking about success I've had with other customers that will be relevant to that customer. So what I'm doing by this is I'm taking a scenario where I'm taking discovery as we know it out of the equation to a degree, because customers don't like being interrogated, right? When we first meet a customer, they meet us because they want to know what we can do for them. They don't understand that our solutions are broad and, you know, we need to understand a little bit about them before we can actually tailor the message towards what their needs are. So we get into this kind of catch-22 where they're like, just show me what you've got. And you're like, no, I need to ask you, like, what's keeping you awake at night? And, you know, what do you care about? And who else cares about this? Like, nonsense, bad selling. Good selling is where you go in and you're able to capture the customer's attention by talking about genuine use cases that they may probably have, which has got to be, that's where your research comes in. That's where your domain expertise comes in. And you've got to talk to the customer about how you've helped other people solve those problems, and the situation they were in before they worked with your company, and the utopia state they have after, and the delta between the two, which is the metrics. That helps the customer to understand, first and foremost, in a storytelling manner, what your solution does. It's reference selling, which we all know is brilliant. It's storytelling. We're not calling the customers ugly, baby ugly. You know that thing where we go into, salespeople go in and they go, oh, I checked out your website. Takes a little while to load. It's probably losing you a couple of million a year. And the customer's like, hold on a minute, like I just invited you into my office and you're already like trying to like criticize me. I'm not going to tell you anything else that I've got any problems wise, because you know you're going to use it against me. This way of selling, we're talking about somebody else's solution, and we've helped them to define that utopia state. So that is happening in a first meeting. And what I'm able to do there is open up the customer's mind to what our solution does without it feeling like an interrogation or without it feeling like a pitch. It's conversational. And if there's interest there in those use cases, we can dig into them and we can sort of see how relevant they are to that customer and then go from there. But this idea of kind of trying to qualify in or qualify out based on like asking customers questions, no professional medical organization thinks like that.
Yeah. And I think that, look, and there's some people who are like, you know, the goal, Andy, and again, I think this is where you and I are super aligned, is the reason I'm pushing on this isn't to be argumentative. It's not to say, you know, this is wrong. what I want to bring light to is what Andy just said, is that the application of MEDDIC and MEDDIC in many organizations. And look, I agree, world-class organizations who've got it figured out, checkbox, 100% agree. But, and Andy, you probably see this too. My point is that I would argue over 50% of the time it is misapplied. And instead it's applied. And again, and a lot of people talk about it. Like even while I'm monitoring the chat over here, you know, MEDDIC sits across the deal. MEDDIC sits across the deal. Totally agree. But when I see organizations, how they train and coach their reps and talk to their reps, they're expecting it like a initial call or first 2 calls where we're going to get all like, and if you don't have those things, the deal, it's not a real deal. And I think what I'm trying to bring to light here, successfully or not, is it's the misapplication and the over focus on a first call qualification that I think is short circuiting or leading to major issues with organizations in terms of how they actually apply it.
Sure. Yeah.
If that's
fair. You're a Texan, right? You must like barbecue.
I do. I actually had Franklin's for the first time, and anybody who knows barbecue knows Franklin's is one of the first yesterday.
Okay. So let me run this. Let me run this for you. So you like brisket. You've got Franklin's. He's like, I'm going to get you the best brisket, Jake. This brisket is going to be from the best source. It's every expert in the world. All the top barbecuers will agree this is the brisket. Gives you the brisket. You go home. You put it in your microwave for 20 hours and leave it on. Ping, comes out. You try it, it's revolting. You might even get food poisoning, right? Now, what you're doing is you're saying that brisket's bad because it was misapplied, misimplemented, right? And Franklin would be like,
no, I'm not saying that. No, I'm not. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm not at all.
Okay.
I'm saying that more often than not, people are eating microwave brisket. They're not eating brisket the way that they should.
Right. But that's not brisket's fault. Like,
I'm not blaming MEDDIC. I'm not blaming MEDDIC for this. I'm not. Now there are parts of it that I want to get into that I think are maybe a little outdated, and we can talk about that now. But no, again, very clear. I've got no problem with MEDDIC. I agree. Look, as a framework for a deal, great, fantastic. I'm good with a lot of different frameworks, and if it helps to really easily be able to understand where am I at in the deal, I'm all for it. Now, I do feel like there are some concepts, and let's start with champion. Let's start there. And we've got some polls I think the team want to do too around like the discovery process and some other things as well too. So we'll probably drop some polls in the Zoom here coming up too, just to kind of get a flavor for people. So let's talk about the idea of a champion. I don't believe you need a champion to close a big deal. I've done it. I've closed 7-figure plus deals. And have I had people who were not detractors? Have I had people who were positive, etc.? But I feel like the idea that you have to have this, like, and especially in today's world where people are more busy than ever, they've got more meetings than ever, that if you don't have this person who all of a sudden this becomes their life's work to shepherd you around, that you can't close big deals. I haven't seen that to be the case. And so tell me why do we think champions are so important?
Yeah, like the way I define it is, yeah, you're right. The term to define it as selling is debatable, because I think that all good selling orientates around having, and you're talking champion as a singular thing. I think it orientates around having champions. I think if you for the people listening along, if you think about for a second the best deal you've ever closed, the one you're most proud about, the one that if you're in a job interview that they say, tell me about your best deal, the one that you really made the difference, the one that if one of your peers ran it, you don't think either it would have been one, or if it was one, it would have taken longer for less money, right? Everyone picture that deal, their like favorite deal. You picturing yours?
Yep, I'll picture it.
I think you had a champion in that. In fact, I would bet a lot of money you had a champion in that deal, because all of good selling orientates around having somebody to work with. Because it's different. It depends what you're selling though, Jay. Because if you're thinking about this best deal, was this and big deals don't mean complex deals, right? You know, I can sell like 1 million reams of paper, and as long as the GSM's the same as the next person next to me,
it's a commodity. No,
right.
I'm not thinking about that. I guess why don't we define? How about let's define it. Karina called out. She said, "I'm disappointed. I thought we were going to talk about the deployment of MEDDIC, and we are talking about it. So sorry, Karina." You know, maybe we define champion. Maybe that's it too. To me, again, when I think about the deployment of MEDDIC and how people view champion, okay, let's see, it's this person. Like, do you have someone who's like setting up meetings for you? Who's doing, like, there's a champion, at least in the definition I understand, is like someone who's an advocate, not someone who's an admin. Great, yeah, sir. Susan helped to facilitate a few meetings, but who cares? Like, I didn't need her to do it. It would have been great. I mean, like, look, I love it when I've got a champion in a deal. I love it. It's great, right? When they're really a champion and they're like going and doing it for me. But yeah, I don't need someone to love it. I'm getting, like, to your point, I make a business case. I build business relationships. I don't need this champion who's like just like my cheerleader. So how do you define? Because that's how I define it. And that's where I see it go wrong in the deployment of it, is people think if I don't have a cheerleader, then there's no deal. How do you define champion?
Yeah. So taking it a step back before we get into that, because I think that is really important. If you're selling complex solutions, we're talking transformational technology here. We're talking about solutions that, as to your sort of earlier point, a lot of the time, these companies don't have budget for what we're selling, right? We're entering in from some excellent marketings, from a great sales development rep, getting us some time with somebody, capturing somebody's attention via some act of ingenuity. As you said, people are busy. When we get in front of those people, let's just answer me this question. So you have a great first meeting. It's gone exactly how you think a great first meeting goes, right? And you're going to progress the next steps. What happens? Tell me what happens in that next meeting. What happens in meeting 2, typically in an ideal world for you?
Typically in meeting 2, what happens is I tell them in meeting 1, hey, typically what happens next is because I know the solution is we'll usually loop in someone from IT who handles this. We'll loop in someone from marketing who handles this. We'll get a bigger picture on if there's alignment or not. And then in the next meeting, and that's where we'll go from there. Does that work for you, Jane? Fantastic. Jane sets up the meeting. Second meeting, big group of people. I start the meeting, right? And I say, hey, everyone, looking forward to the conversation today. Today's goal is to talk big picture about what we do, areas of opportunity we've identified, and see if there's a fit. From this meeting, we will set up a subsequent IT validation meeting. Marketing will meet and talk about integration. And then the other groups will have this XYZ will happen. Sound good, everybody? Great. Second meeting.
But how do you get those people in that second meeting?
I tell them who needs to be involved in the second meeting.
You tell Jane?
Correct.
Who needs to be
because I know who needs to be, because I know I've sold this product 1,000 times.
Are we like crystals and things and saying, Jane, we need these people? Or are you asking?
No, because I've already asked the question in discovery. I've already asked the question, so I know who needs to be involved.
Do you then go around, Jane, and invite those people in?
I don't need to.
I don't understand. If you have a first meeting,
I have a first meeting in the discovery process. I say, great, hey Jane. So typically, when you want to implement a new solution, who else is typically involved?
Okay,
John from IT. Okay, and then in terms of like user attribution, who is typically? Oh, that's Rachel from marketing.
I've got that.
All I do is say,
how typically. How do you get John and Rachel into the meeting too? How do you get them there?
I'm not following.
The point I'm making is, you said that champions, no one has time to be an admin and bring people into a meeting. I'm wondering how you've gone from having Jane to having Rachel and these other people in meeting 2. How do you get them there?
But that's an admin. That's an ad. She has their email addresses, but I send the invite, and she adds them in, and then I don't need Jane to champion. I will go make the business case with IT and marketing. That's not Jane's job. It's my job.
But Rachel's never heard of you before.
It doesn't matter. That's my job in the first meeting, is to create urgency, create ideas
with who? Jane.
With the group I just said. You asked me how I run a second meeting. I'm telling you how I run a second meeting. I mean, I told you I read a first meeting.
This is bananas. How are you getting, like you get a meeting with Jane. Correct. How do you do a great job, right? No one's debating.
I crush it, right? Exactly.
You crush it. And then you say, as you did, I like how you said it. We need these people in. This is the typical people in, right? To the next meeting. Yeah.
Right.
How do you get those people into the second meeting?
I'm not following. Jane invites them.
Jane invites them. Whoa.
But that's an admin task. That's not a champion. That's an admin task. She literally added an email address. But
your whole point around this is people don't have time to do that. You said people don't have time. That was the point.
To be a champion. To me, there's again, and I said this very clearly. There's an admin, someone who can help me facilitate, but that's not a champion. Like again, and I said this very clearly. Cheerleader. I don't think that there's a cheerleader, right? Like, and a lot of people think a champion is someone who's going to shepherd you. I told Jane who needed to be involved because I've done hundreds of deals, and I know in an organization, if marketing doesn't sign off, the deal's not going to get done. If IT doesn't sign off, the deal's not going to get done.
Yeah, sure. But IT are busy. So you need somebody to bring IT into the opportunity, right? How do you get IT into the opportunity if you haven't got somebody with power and influence, right? Definition number one, they have to have power and influence. If somebody who is a cheerleader, which is a term that I've never seen associated with a champion ever, by the way, if you have a cheerleader walking over to IT and saying, hey, I need you to come into this meeting, and they don't have power and influence, that person says, sorry, I'm really busy. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is they have to have a vested interest in your success. Your success. That doesn't mean they have to be biased for you to win. It means that they have to see that what you bring to the table is going to make them successful in parallel with them. So they have to have a buy-in that what you're doing for Jane in this case is going to help Jane maybe make her less busy so she can do more things like this, right? So you have to, and by the way, every person has a different vested interest, which is why it's so important to focus on the champion, because one champion could be all about the company. They could be like, cut me in half, I bleed blue the same color as Ford, for example. Another champion could be like, hey, all I care about is my ego, and I want this because it's going to be something I can put on my CV and talk about at events, right? So we focus on the vested interest, getting to the bottom of what's in it for that person so that we can inspire them to march over to IT and say, hey, I really need you to come to me. You need to see Jake. He's awesome, man. He blew my socks off in this meeting. So that's the second one. So first, power and influence. Second, they have to have a vested interest in your success. And the third is they have to be selling internally for when you are not there, because you can't always be there. And what's going to happen is, you know, big Jeff's going to come into the meeting and poo-poo on all the good truths you said. And you need Jane to be able to stand up and say, you know what, Jeff, I see your point, but let me tell you why that's not quite correct.
I can get down with that. The last part, again, I would think maybe the last part in particular, yeah, you probably, yeah. And maybe I would phrase it differently. It's just like to detract, right? You definitely don't need detractors, right? You need this person involved. So I can get down with that. I can get down with that as a definition of a champion. And a lot of this, I think, and again, Andy, and for everyone kind of listening, the reason I'm trying to bring up a lot of these points is, again, in the misdeployment of it. And so like, we can kind of focus there, is that, again, and I'll go back and say this, what I want us to do is think. I want us to think about this, because what Andy said, I'm down for, which is someone who sees a value for themselves. And the other thing I'll call out, and Andy said this very briefly, is you need multiple people. Again, the champion piece, but you need to understand what's these different people all need to understand. So when you get that second meeting, IT needs to understand what's in it for them. Marketing understands what's in it for them. And still Jane understands what's in it for her as well too. And I think for me, at how I see this, Andy, in the misapplication, again, and this isn't about microwave brisket, it's that, because what I'm trying to call out, Andy, and like and I think what people are getting at here in some of the chat is, I want to talk about the misapplication of MEDDIC. And again, it's not about a lot of this, which, some of these other things. It's about a lot of people with champion. It's like, and again, because I hear reps say this, I'm sure you've heard this. Like, it's like, Susan's going to do it for me. It's like, well, sure, she'll sell a little bit for you internally, but like, you've got to put together the ROI case. You've got to drive the next meetings. You've got to build momentum. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's what I'm getting at, Andy, with a lot of this stuff, is not it's how I consistently see it applied in the real world versus, you know, having a fundamental issue. So I'm going to ask you, because you look, you're the, you know, the MEDDIC guy, and let's talk about the deployment of MEDDIC, and maybe you can give your opinion.
Sure.
Where do you think companies misapply MEDDIC? I'm giving kind of my counter takes on some of this, but what about you? I mean, look, you come into companies and say, we want to do MEDDIC, or we want to use MEDDPICC, or one of these tools. How do you see it most commonly misapplied?
Yeah, sure. Good question. So I think it comes around the kind of perception of what MEDDIC is and what MEDDIC does. I think so many of the misapplications I see, and these are people with the best intentions as well, is they think about MEDDIC from a kind of a reactive perspective. So they think about it for deal reviews. They think about it for like checkboxes in CRM. They think about it as like, before I can move from stage 4 to stage 5, I have to have this and that checked. And some of those things have a place. I'm not criticizing those things. Deal reviews are incredibly powerful. Having kind of, sales processes and sort of entrance and exit criteria on those are important. But that's not what MEDDIC is. MEDDIC is a framework that helps people stay on the front foot in their deals. The best, most elite sellers, when they think about MEDDIC, is they're thinking about it proactively. It's almost like a second nature to them. It becomes a common language of how they think about their deals. So they're constantly thinking about, you know, value, who is this value relevant to, how do we get this deal done in the most efficient manner? Because I think that's a thing that I see. If I always like to think about our industry as almost like sports leagues. And we've got, you know, I know in the US you have like the national leagues, and then, but in the UK we have like in what we would call football, because you play it with a foot and a ball, not a hand and an egg. But we have what you would call soccer, and there's lots of leagues there, right? There's lots of leagues, and you know what league you're in, right? And if I think about the top league, the Premier League, what the question in those companies is not so much about, are we going to win this deal or not? Because they're so well qualified in the way that I use it. They understand where they stand. They know they can't win them all. They know they have competitors that in some instances are better suited. So the question comes not, are we going to win or lose this deal? This question becomes, how quickly can we win this deal? How much value can we extract from this opportunity? And I think that's something that, if we're thinking about like correct implementations of MEDDIC, those are what people are using it for, as a way of having real confidence about where you stand in the deal, not about like managers kind of using it as a checklist or anything like that. That's poor.
Yeah. Well, look, I love that. And that's, I mean, Andy, honestly, that's why, you know, I wanted us to talk about this, is what you just said. And so I think anyone out there who's listening, right, and we've got, you know, almost 80 plus people between Zoom and LinkedIn, maybe 90 plus who have tuned in. What Andy just said to me is the key, and which is MEDDIC should not be applied as an exit. And Andy, by the way, if I'm paraphrasing wrong, please correct me. It should not be applied as an exit criteria to move from step X to step Y. Is that right? I mean, is that?
So I think it can be. That could be something you could do. You could say, look, before we send a customer proposal, right? Before we put, in my opinion, if we're sending a customer proposal, that should be.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're at like the later stages for sure. But what about early stages?
Sure, but on that point, I think it is useful to say, hey, you haven't qualified that you've got a champion here, so you're just sending something into thin air. Right? This person could just get in their inbox and never be read. So before we get to that point where we're gonna, in my mind, a proposal needs to be a real masterpiece, right? If I'm going to the stage of sending someone a proposal, it's taking hours of my time because it's representing all of the effort I've put in so far. It's like it's the script, it's everything I've done for that deal so far, right? And I can afford to do that because I'm qualifying the opportunity as being a real winnable opportunity. I can't afford to do that if I'm spreading myself thin, don't know where I'm winning or losing. So to your question, I think there is some use in having kind of entrance exit criteria where, for example, you cannot move to proposal stage because you haven't actually built a champion, right?
Yeah.
But that's the reactive side of MEDDIC. That's like, we're here now, what are we going to do about it? I like to think about MEDDIC proactively, like how I'm at this stage, wherever I am, what can I do to stay on the front foot? What can I do to help my champion to champion me, hence the term champion, right? What can I do to engage or re-engage with the economic buyer? What can I do to really make sure the customer understands the decision criteria and where we sit on that, where we're strong on that, where we're differentiated on that, all of those things. What can I do when I'm looking at this decision process we have to go through? What can I do to accelerate some of that timeline forwards? What can I do to, because we all know that the most under talked about lever in the sales velocity is time to close. We all focus about amount of opportunities and close rate and AOV and all that sort of stuff. Time to close is sat right in front of salespeople as the biggest impact you can make. If you improve that 10%, it has a bigger impact on any other lever you can pull in your sales velocity. So just by accelerating meetings, just by paying attention to the process, you can become a better salesperson without even really doing anything, right? You're just being more attentive to the process itself. So that's just, you know, we could go
How
into
do you
all
deal?
these things.
Yeah, I think that's right. So again, I'll paraphrase, which is toward the later stages, it's fine. But I think what I heard is that early stages, like your first meeting or second meeting, right? You should not be saying, you know, do I have all of this figured out in the first call, right? Like, or the second call. Is that fair?
So my example earlier, where I had a first meeting with somebody who was mapping out the stakeholders with me, who has verbally agreed that they want to move forward.
Did they come inbound or were they outbound?
They were a referral.
Exactly.
So it's a hot lead, right?
Exactly.
But the point here is they're still not a champion, right? They're a potential champion. Okay. And my job is now to build them into a champion. And the way that I do that is by understanding what their goal is, what their challenges are, and making sure that I align myself to those. So our whole first conversation, really, you know, and the reason why, just to give some more context, why she went into opening up the stakeholders was because some of the challenges she has is working with other teams, other departments. MEDDIC can kind of help with that, like that communication thing. So she was sort of thinking bigger picture. She's like, I can solve this problem I've got right now, but oh, if we could solve this across the entire organization, that would be brilliant for me. It's not that she's trying to help me. It's not that she's trying to like look good to her peers. She's thinking if everyone used MEDDIC, it would be better for me. And so that's what I'm aligning to. And also maybe I didn't quite get to this, but there might be something that she wants to be the pioneer, the person that's kind of like leading the project. That might be a thing. I didn't qualify that yet. I will, you know, sometimes those things are obvious. Sometimes you need to, you know, use EQ and listen a little bit more to find those things out.
Yeah. So again, I think everyone, and I love what you just said there, which is even though in the first call you didn't identify her as a champion necessarily yet, right? Yeah. And I think, again, for a lot of people that are listening, and when you think about how it's the practical application of it, that's where I think, again, a lot of people just need to be aware that, you know, be very cognizant in the early stages of deals about how you view the term qualification. And if you are using certain, you know, again, are you short circuiting deals or your sales organization because you've brainwashed them to think like if there's no X, Y, you know, whatever the criteria you put in the early stages. Because again, I think like everything that you said aligns to over the series of a handful of calls and interactions, you start to identify the different elements of MEDDIC and MEDDIC. It doesn't always happen on the first call, or maybe even sometimes the second call. And I think and I think that that's a really important point for anybody who's out there deploying it, that if you're requiring your sales team and you think that by requiring it early, you're actually you're not really following, from what I understand, Andy, the spirit of MEDDIC, which is that and it's like David Weiss joined in too. It's about a deal framework that tends to unfold over a series of interactions, not after one call or maybe even two calls.
Yeah, it's a framework, right? I anecdotally, I have one of my best customers and a chap that's become a really good friend, I would say. But I went probably 75% of the sales process with that person, thinking that I was trying to make them my champion. They're from, I won't say where they're from because it might give away, I don't want to think they're listening, but their style is very, very reserved. Super reserved. And so I didn't know whether they were my champion. They kind of kept their cards very close to their chest, but I didn't stop in trying to build that person my champion. On the call, when they announced that they'd chosen us, this person told me that they had a heated discussion with the CRO, who was the economic buyer, that if they should go with me, and the CRO wanted to go with a competitor. And my champion basically stuck their neck out to say, no, I want to go with Andy. And he told me he didn't have to get to this point, but he said he would have resigned if they'd have gone with the other vendor. That's what, whether he would have done, I don't know, but that's what he told me, right? And so the point here is that you're in those instances behind closed doors. If I didn't have that person as a champion, I would have lost that deal. If that person didn't have power and influence, I would have lost that deal. If that person didn't have a vested interest, which they're putting their name to the project, I would have lost that deal. And if that person obviously wasn't selling internally for me, I would have lost that deal. And by the way, the CRO is a big fan of ours now. He's referred people to us as well. So it all ends well, but it's a great example of where I, to your point, didn't even know that person was my champion. I was striving all the way through to make sure, but I wasn't sure. And I wouldn't have put my hand up and said, if I had a manager, I wouldn't have said, yep, going to put my name on this person's definitely a champion. But I was trying. And sometimes that would have gone the other way for me. That's the call we have to make sometimes with deals like that, right?
I think that, and again, what I really hope is that as people are listening to this, again, and as you described it, again, in this deal, I mean, I guess technically you might not have, if your leader, like you said, hey, do you have a champion? Are you, do you have this person? And you might have said, maybe. And I think what I hear is many times leaders that are like, okay, there's no deal, or because it's not, or it forces, or I'm forced as a rep.
Yeah.
If I have a Salesforce instance where I'm forced to implement fields in MEDDIC or MEDDIC, I'm forced to put in shit that's not real.
Yes. So I love where you're going with this, because this for me is a bigger picture of the problem that you're seeing, because bad manager at that point. So tell me about your champion. Doesn't sound like you're a champion. Good manager. Okay, who's our champion here? Right, tell me all about it. Like, okay, cool. Oh, okay, I see what you mean there. Like, how can I help? I'm in this deal. This is not your deal. This is my deal, right? This is my deal. This is the SE's deal. This is the SDR's deal. Everybody's deal is this. And it's about accountability. A good sales leader is accountable for MEDDIC, for the deal, for everything, right? Particularly like the stakeholder side of things. This concept that we have to have the salesperson owning deals, the salesperson owning all the contacts, madness. It's madness. In a typical kind of enterprise deal, we'll have an SDR who probably a lot of the time has started the conversation off. Let's keep them engaged, keep them warming people up, right? They've got a pass that they're not in the deal. We've got the AE obviously acting, managing the deal itself. We should have a senior leader who's trying to engage with senior stakeholders. We can even have the sales engineer, who, by the way, the most underused tactic in our industry is the sales engineer taking ownership of the technical stakeholder, their technical counterpart. Their technical counterpart doesn't want to hear from a salesperson, but they love sales engineers because they're both techie, they both speak the same language. So I think about it like this: is when I'm thinking about my stakeholder map, I'm not thinking, we all talk about being single threaded, and that's like salesperson has to have multiple contacts. We never talk about being single threaded the other way around. Like we're so comfortable just having an AE. How many people you got? Oh, I've got 5 contacts. Great, good job. Keep going, try and get more. No one ever says, but how many people from our side of the business are attached to the customer?
Yeah, Eric asked the same question. Yeah, and I'm 100% with you. As again, I think when a lot of people they think about this concept again of identifying or managing, is a good enterprise seller. You're the quarterback. You're not playing all the positions, or the coach, or whatever analogy. Yeah. You are the person who's orchestrating. I'm gonna have this person go line up against this person. This person go line up against this person. And I think, again, there's a lot of data out there that supports, like, when you have more than 3 or 4 people engaged from your side, like close rates go up, deal cycles are shorter. So let's, again, we've got 10 minutes left. There's a few questions.
Cool.
What else? So, and I really, again, what I love about this conversation, and again, a lot of people think, I didn't feel like we were being argumentative. I thought we were being clarifying, is that MEDDIC should be viewed as a deal framework that if we have these things, we've got a higher likelihood of getting this thing done. At a certain stage, we should have these things identified, or most of them. Mm-hmm. It should not be applied in very early stages, as if I don't have all of this, there's no deal, right? And that to me is one of the issues with deployment, right? That you talked about. What are the other issues with deployment? So let's talk about, like, whenever you go and work with a team, Andy, and they want to implement this, across 200 reps, 300 reps, what are the other issues you see in deployment? That you see again with these organizations as a part of this? Like, where else does it fall down when people are trying to implement it? Because I love it that, again, it's like, don't have fields that say after the first discovery meeting, I've got to have these 6 fields filled out, or you're just going to get rubbish, right? To use that's my UK coming out, right?
Yeah,
Rubbish, right?
Good.
So what else? What are some other pitfalls you see as companies deploy this incorrectly?
Yeah, so much of it orientates around the implementation, around the culture that goes with it, so much around how the expectation that goes with it. And it's like you have to really put some time and effort into thinking about the why behind you. Why are you doing this? What is the reason why we're implementing MEDDIC? And something that's really funny is that we looked at some data recently of like our inbounds and end of quarter ends. Like, we have quiet quarter ends, we have really busy quarter beginnings, because what happens is people have missed their number, they've messed up, something's got to change, and obviously they look to MEDDIC.
Well, obviously now you're their savior, Andy. If we just implement MEDDIC, like, we're going to grow our sales immediately.
Yeah. So it needs to be. So the first thing is this: sales. Of all the beneficiaries of MEDDIC, the number one beneficiary is the AE themselves, right? Even if, like, so I when I first learned MEDDIC, I went from one company to another company that said they used it, but it's a classic example of a bad implementation, that what you would just talk about. So no one really used it. In fact, they didn't even really inspect it. These derelict fields in Salesforce, right? I carried on using it. It's my DNA of how I sell. It's my second nature, right? So that is me in isolation, no one else caring about it. I'm just using it because it's the way that I sell. It keeps me on the front foot, right? So it's really important for an implementation that you start with the AE. They're the ones that get the most benefit from it. Sure, SEs will benefit because they won't get pulled into dead deals, or they'll be properly kind of understanding what the deal is before they get pulled in. Same thing for like misforecasting, all that kind of stuff, using resources badly. Like, lots of other people benefit, but the number one beneficiary is the AE. So we have to ensure that they are fully understanding what it is. And one of the problems, and I think it's one of the key reasons why we're having this conversation, is that MEDDIC is effectively open source, right? And you can be someone that's worked at like PTC, BMC, like, Blade Logic, that's gone to App Dynamics, Snowflake, all these great MEDDIC.
Right.
And you could have been using it for 15, 20 years sometimes, right? And you say, yeah, I use MEDDIC. And then there could be someone that's applied for a job, seen on the job description that it says MEDDIC is required. And they've gone, oh, what's that? And they've gone on they've Googled, and the HubSpot articles come up, and it's like 200 words long. And they've gone, oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And that is one of the fundamental issues we have, because, you're talking about the HubSpot people. I'm thinking about the elite people. And obviously it's a long spectrum between. And like, you're seeing the ones over here, it seems, and I'm seeing ones over here. And so the real way you get more elite is better understanding of it. And the idea of like, that you can just kind of understand what the letters mean and kind of start reactively talking about it in deals is not going to be the same as being a professional salesperson that uses it. So to summarize what I said there, because I went a lot of places, the real problem with implementation is that people aren't fully understanding it, and they're not being, I'm not sure if incentivized is the right word, but incentivized from a perspective of, I'm being told that we're implementing MEDDIC in my sales team as an AE, and I just think it's another thing. Last month it was Challenger, the month before it was this new sales tool, the month before that, but I don't know why. It's just another flavor of the month thing. When in fact, if I really looked into it, I would see that this is the thing for me, as it was for the tens and hundreds of thousands of people that have used it at elite level. This is the thing that can level you up. I was like a firm B player, right? A version of myself, not comparing myself to anyone else. I was a B player version of myself without MEDDIC. MEDDIC helped me unlock my full potential. It gave me the confidence. It got rid of any uncertainty. And that's kind of like, but if so many people, I think the way they get told about it, the way they become introduced to it, the motives aren't right.
That's right. So again, I think for a lot of it, like, again, what I heard is like common definition, the right way to view it, again, is this idea of a deal framework. And again, the concept that people have different, like you said, open source, like, I guess, ideas of what it is, but the reality is, again, even if you have different applications, it's coming up with this common framework, right? That people can, that everyone understands what we're talking about, when this is deployed. The last thing I want to maybe talk about is like, someone brought up that's my issue, MEDDIC versus, snap selling, solution selling, Sandler, Challenger, all this stuff. But again, what I'm taking away from this, and maybe I think I'm having the right takeaway, which is like, those are all very specific ways that you show up in the customer meeting necessarily. To me, when I think about what I hear you talk, Andy, this is the facts or the outcomes of how you execute the process. Is there an issue? Is there this person who will advocate for you when you're not around? And I think maybe that's for people out there listening. You could use both. You could have a challenger sale as your positioning and framework,
right? And
you could be implementing MEDDIC, because it's not the two are not interchangeable. Again,
so you're spot on. One of the great things about MEDDIC is it doesn't mess with the salesperson's style, their tone of voice, right? So yes, you can, if you go back to what I said at the start, focusing on value, stakeholders, and process, right? That's the foundation layer of what you're focusing on. And so using Challenger is a really, really good combination with MEDDIC, because you can kind of challenge the customer based on the metrics of other customers that you've helped, right? Same thing goes for, some people like to use spin selling as ways of getting into the pain. You can do that too.
Sure.
Right? There's all of these great methodologies out there. Gap selling is a brilliant one. Like, gap selling works tremendously well. But there's all of them, and the difference between, if you're going to say like Miller Hyman and Sandler, they do go head to head. But MEDDIC would sit underneath both of those, because it's like a framework to help focus on the right things on the front foot. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think if I think about most elite sellers that I know, they don't say I'm a challenger sale, I'm this sale, that sale. They've got incredible emotional intelligence mixed with domain expertise, mixed with experience of understanding the craft of sales. And what MEDDIC does for them is acts as a framework underneath all of those high skills to keep them focused and orientated on the right page. It's like a map. It like keeps them on the front foot.
Right. I think that, hopefully for everyone listening, that's your takeaway, right? Is what Andy just said, is that this, and if you read his book, etc., it's that this is a map, and I think as we kind of like settle, as we wrap up here, and again, like you said, the term qualification, is there a qualification aspect? Sure. I think what my takeaway is, in the proper application, that happens, it happens as a way to talk about the deal. MEDDIC is a way to have the conversation, but as we've talked about now 2 or 3 times to drive it home, it's just, the key is to not look at it as, if I don't have these 5 fields filled out after the first or second call, then I'm not in the deal. Instead, it's a way to, like, as you said, as an elite seller, to really just quickly understand, like, hey, I know I've got a much higher likelihood to close this thing if I've got these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boxes checked, right? Like as a part of this. So Andy, look, man, I really enjoyed this. I really thought that this is it was a really powerful and good conversation. A lot of comments in here on both LinkedIn and on Zoom. And, any parting thoughts for you? Anything that you want to leave people with?
No, I think I just think it all orientates back to that kind of understanding of what qualification is. Probably the GOAT of our industry, John McMahon, wrote this book, The Qualified Sales Leader. And I think what we can take from that is this guy is probably the greatest sales leader of all tech generations. He could have written a book called The Pipeline Leader. He could have written a book called The Hiring Leader, all those important things. He focused on qualification. And I think I would plug his book, because I think if you come out of this, if you read this book, your understanding of like the art and the science of sales from a qualification perspective, pretty good. And if you think about him, he's on the board of Snowflake. They are the most successful tech company of all time in terms of growth. They've got like 180% net retention. It's insane how strong they are. And they are probably the most modern successful company with using MEDDIC. The team over there are insanely good. So that's for me. Like if you're saying, hey, we want to be as good as Snowflake are, because they're at the top of the game,
Let's go check it out.
Yeah.
Love it, man. All right, Andy, look, man, I really enjoyed it. And again, I think it was a really good conversation to be had, and to really kind of dig into what it means and what great application looks like. And I think hopefully everyone listening to this can kind of go back to their org and say, hey, you know, maybe we're using it, but are we using it correctly? Or maybe we're not using it, but yeah, this actually could be helpful. So Andy, I appreciate it, man. I think people got a lot out of the convo.
Cool. Me too, man. Thank you. Nice to chat.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We've got some things coming up. We'll keep you in the loop on those. We've got a couple webinars, I think Monday. We've got another LinkedIn Live, etc. So we'll keep everyone up to speed on that. Andy, big thank you. Everyone else, if I don't talk to you, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, everyone. Thanks, Andy.